dark wooden caskets, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold my phone. It was from my mother. It read, "We won't be making it to the funeral. Your brother's family already booked the resort in Hawaii, and honestly, we view this burial as a trivial event not worth interrupting our vacation for." My chest collapsed. My husband and my beautiful 4-year-old daughter were gone, taken by a drunk driver, and my own parents called their final farewell trivial. I didn't reply. I blocked them, buried my soulmates alone, and swore they were dead to me. But 3 days later, they walked into my living room, tan from the beach, and demanded $40,000 from the insurance payout. They expected a crying, broken girl. Instead, their faces turned completely pale when I smiled, pulled out a single legal document, and completely destroyed them. My name is Clara. I am 28 years old, and 3 months ago, my entire world was completely obliterated in a single, devastating second. My husband, Mark, and our beautiful 4-year-old daughter, Lily, were driving home from the grocery store when a drunk driver blew through a red light, crushing their car. They died instantly. Just like that, I went from a happy mother and wife to a ghost walking through an empty house filled with quiet toys and unworn shoes. The morning I was trying to arrange their joint funeral, my hands were shaking so violently, I could barely breathe. I desperately needed my mother. I needed her to hold me, to tell me I would survive this nightmare. Instead, my phone buzzed with a text that permanently shattered whatever love I had left for my biological family. The message from my mother read, "We won't be making it to the funeral. Your brother's family already booked the resort in Hawaii, and honestly, we view this burial as a trivial event not worth interrupting our vacation for." I stood frozen in the middle of my empty hallway, the harsh light hitting my face as a hollow, absolute despair took over my entire being. My chest collapsed under the weight of their cruelty. The people who gave me life looked at the caskets of my husband and child and saw nothing more than an inconvenient schedule conflict. I didn't scream, and I didn't reply. I simply blocked their numbers, realizing I was entirely on my own. The day of the funeral was cold, gray, and heavy with a relentless, biting rain. I stood beneath a black umbrella, completely alone, watching those two small, dark wooden caskets lower into the frozen earth. While my hands bled from gripping the handle tightly, my family was thousands of miles away, sunbathing on a tropical beach in Hawaii, sipping cocktails without a single care in the world. They had cast me out into the dark. But as the dirt finally covered my past, a fierce, protective numbness took over my soul. The next morning, I forced myself to visit Mark's estate attorney, Arthur, expecting the absolute worst. I was terrified that medical bills and funeral costs would drain what little savings we had left, leaving me completely destitute. But as I sat across from Arthur in his quiet office, he slid a thick manila folder toward me and smiled softly. What he revealed left me absolutely breathless. Mark had been quietly brilliant with our finances. Years ago, he had established a massive, private umbrella insurance policy and shifted his tech investments into a protected trust. Arthur looked me dead in the eye and said, "Clara, you aren't broke. You're looking at a payout of nearly $3 million. But the best part? Mark had included a strict legal clause specifically stating that under no circumstances could any biological relative of mine ever touch, claim, or access a single penny of this wealth. 3 days after burying my husband and daughter, I walked up the steps to my house, exhausted to my very bones. But as I pushed the front door open, the faint sound of laughter echoed from the kitchen. My heart stopped. Stepping into the living room, I found my parents and my brother, Julian, lounging on my sofa. They had used an old spare key to let themselves in. I stared at them, completely stunned. They looked vibrant, their skin deeply tanned from the Hawaiian sun, completely devoid of any remorse, grief, or shame. There were no tears for their granddaughter, no condolences for their son-in-law. Instead, my mother looked up, casually brushed a piece of lint off her linen beach dress, and said, "Oh, Clara, you're finally back. We need to talk about some urgent family business." Before I could even process the sheer violation of their presence, my father stood up and smoothly took control of the room. He didn't ask how I was surviving. He didn't offer a hug. He simply leaned against my dining table, cleared his throat, and said, "Julian's consulting firm is facing a major cash flow crisis, Clara. We know Mark probably left you a modest life insurance policy, around $50,000. As a family, we've decided it's only right that you hand over $40,000 immediately to save your brother's business. It's what family does." A normal person would have screamed, cried, or thrown them out of the house. But as I stood there looking at their smug, expectant faces, something shifted inside me. I realized that if I fought them openly, they would just play the victim and tie me up in endless drama. I needed them to walk completely blindly into the trap I was about to set. So, I forced a trembling breath, looked down at the floor, and let my voice drop into a weak, submissive whisper. $40,000? I asked, playing the part of the broken, helpless widow perfectly. That's almost everything Mark left me. Are you sure Julian needs it that badly? My father nodded right away, his eyes lighting up with pure, unchecked greed. He and Julian immediately began explaining exactly why they deserved my money, callously stating that Mark was gone anyway and that the living family mattered more than the dead. What they didn't realize was that every single word bouncing off the walls was being captured in high-definition audio and video by the hidden home security cameras Mark had installed in the living room corners. They were actively confessing to using my tragedy as an easy payday. I nodded slowly, wiping away a fake tear, and said, "Fine, let's do this properly. Come to dinner at your place tomorrow night. Bring your attorney, and I'll sign over everything you want." They smiled, completely convinced they had won. The moment the front door clicked shut behind them, the helpless act evaporated from my face. I didn't waste a single second crying. Instead, I grabbed my keys, drove straight back to Arthur's office, and spent the next 24 hours mapping out a ruthless legal execution. Arthur was more than ready to help me tear them apart. If they wanted to play dirty while the funeral flowers were still fresh, I was going to show them exactly what happens when you underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. As Arthur began diving deep into our financial histories to prepare the paperwork, he uncovered a dark, long-buried secret that changed everything. 5 years ago, my brother Julian had faced another massive financial disaster. To save his own skin, he had secretly accessed Mark and my joint savings account, using a masterfully forged signature to steal $50,000. Mark had actually discovered the theft back then, but because he loved me and wanted to maintain family peace, he quietly paid back the missing funds himself and kept the crime a secret from me. But Mark hadn't destroyed the proof. He had kept every single piece of evidence, the forged bank slips, the fraudulent transfer logs, and the text messages where Julian begged him not to call the police, safely locked away in his private digital vault. Arthur looked up from his computer screen, his eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. "Clara, your brother committed grand larceny and fraud. They think you are signing a release form tomorrow night to hand over your insurance money, but I am drafting a legally binding confession disguised as a standard settlement. The moment they sign it, they are trapped." The atmosphere inside my parents' dining room was thick with a disgusting sense of triumph. When I walked in the next evening, they were actively pouring expensive wine, laughing and celebrating their upcoming financial windfall. They hadn't even set a place for me at the table. To them, I was just a broken ATM machine that needed to hand over the cash. My brother Julian slid a chair out for me, a patronizing, greasy smile plastered across his face. "We're so glad you're doing the right thing for the family, Clara," he said smoothly. I didn't say a word. I simply sat down, opened my purse, and pulled out a thick legal manila folder. I set it directly on the table. On the center of the table sat a laptop, where their family real estate lawyer, Mr. Vance, was already dialed in via video call to oversee what they thought was a simple cash transfer. My father eagerly snatched the documents out of the folder, completely bypassing the fine print in his rush to get the money. He scrawled his signature across the bottom line and passed it to Julian, who signed it with a smug grin. "All done," my father said, looking up at the laptop screen. "Mr. Vance, I'm emailing you the scanned copy now to finalize it." The video screen flickered as the lawyer opened the file. For 10 seconds, there was absolute silence. Then, right before our eyes, Mr. Vance's face drained of all color. His jaw dropped, and he turned completely pale. "What did you just have them sign, Clara?" the lawyer whispered, his voice trembling. "Howard, Julian, you idiots. This isn't a cash release. You just signed a legally binding confession admitting to grand larceny and fraud for the $50,000 theft 5 years ago. You are legally liable for immediate repayment of $250,000 in damages, or you face immediate criminal prosecution." My father and brother stared at the screen in absolute horror, the wine glasses slipping from their hands as the reality of their ruin set in. I stood up, looked at their trembling, pale faces, and smiled. "You called my husband and daughter's burial a trivial event," I said, my voice cutting through the room like ice. "So consider this a trivial consequence." I walked out, leaving them to the wolves. Within months, Julian was forced into a devastating bankruptcy to avoid prison, and my parents had to sell their own home just to pay back the damages. They were left isolated, completely ruined by their own unchecked greed. As for me, I permanently cut all ties and never looked back. I sold my old house, packed my bags, and took my millions to a beautiful town by the ocean. I used Mark's wealth to establish a foundation for grieving mothers, turning our tragedy into a shield for others. For the first time, I am surrounded by real peace, building a beautiful new life strictly on my own terms. If your own family abandoned you in your darkest hour and returned only for your money, would you have shown them mercy? Or below, tell me what city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached, and watch the next story.